Well, my name is Cynthia Close, and I am the executive director of a nonprofit company, Documentary Educational Resources, and the name says it all. We do focus exclusively on documentary, and we look at the big picture when it comes to marketing documentary. We do handle broadcast international. We have a big international business. We work with filmmakers from all over the world as well as locally. And the resources part too. We have a physical sponsorship program for those of you who don't for who that term is unfamiliar. We may talk a little bit about that. That's on the funding side of things. And also we look very strongly at the educational market as well as international broadcasts. We've been around since 1968, but we were formally incorporated in 71, which means next year is our 35th anniversary. So we will be celebrating that at the MFA next year, and if you all sign up, we do have a table downstairs at the in the Expo room if you'd like to have some more information about what we do. You're welcome to go down there and talk to some of my staff and find out more about us. And I'm happy to be here, and hopefully we can, Louise and I will be able to answer some of the questions that you brought today.
I'm an independent sales agent representing independent nonfiction producers. I've been working in film and television for 25 years. I started actually at WGBH as the Director of International Sales and Co-Productions, and then left and started my own distribution business, focusing initially on exporting independent work from the States to the rest of the world, but very quickly it became a kind of two-way street where I was finding programming in the rest of the world and bringing it into the States. After acting as a distributor in a whole range of genres, from children's programs, documentaries, some independently produced feature films and dramas, a lot of arts programming. About 8 years ago, I changed focus and decided to work specifically with documentaries or nonfiction, and to begin working with independent producers at a much earlier stage, actually from the idea stage, before something is necessarily even on paper, to help to raise production finance through the pre-sale of rights, and to also take a role as a kind of producer, co-producer, advisor on projects, realizing that the more input that I could offer a project from an earlier stage might help to actually increase its opportunities in the international and domestic markets. So I work with a range of producers from newcomers to the more experienced. There are certain genres within the nonfiction framework that I'm not particularly active in. Nature and wildlife is not an area that I'm active in. There are just too many bigger, better resourced companies out there who have a specialty profile for that kind of material. But otherwise, I'm active in history programming. I'm very keen on social issues, social justice subject matter. And stylistically, it can cover a whole range from the more, let's say, innovative experimental to sort of more traditional, classically styled documentary work. As many people are, I'm looking as often as possible for series or limited series. Limited series meaning 3 to 4 episodes. It's kind of the maximum the international market will take at this point. And I'm not really involved in half-hour programs, just in terms of time slots that are available and the buyers that I deal with. But beyond that, I'm kind of wide open and interested in a lot of different topics. But the caveat has to be, it needs to be a project that genuinely can work internationally, or internationally and domestically if I'm going to be acting on behalf of the project in that regard. So Cynthia and I, in talking on the phone prior to this panel, realized that while we do have some overlap in what we do, we're also distinctively different in the sense that she's working in the very extensively in the what's referred to as the non-theatrical, educational, institutional distribution side. And I maybe, in terms of television, I'm touching more on some of the commercial broadcasters than she may often be. And this whole question of defining your market is actually a very intriguing one, something that can or can't be done easily depending on who you are and your subject matter and sort of how passionately involved with it you might be. We wondered if maybe one way to approach this would be to talk about a couple of examples that we've both worked with recently, a couple of projects. And I know you mentioned one or two things on the phone to me, Cynthia, that you thought would be relevant to this question.
Sometimes it's surprising when we introduce a new film. We distribute approximately 500 titles right now, and one film that we have been recently involved with on the educational distribution side was Two Towns of Jasper. A number of the films that the kind of films that we work with and work on the funding side with often wind up being broadcast on POV. We're very heavily involved in the PBS structure on the funding side and the way of approaching PBS very much. And one of the main vehicles for filmmakers to get their work funded still is via that kind of structure and network through PBS, even though they may be under siege. Now, in the case of a film like Two Towns of Jasper, I don't know how many of you may be familiar with that. It was actually last season on POV. That film had built into it a very extensive support system after broadcast to take it into the educational market and to actually as a kind of activist and catalyst for talking about race in America. And that was a kind of separate, that had its own funding structure, the follow-on for that film to hit not only the broadcast market, but to take it extensively into the activist and into the educational arena. So that's a kind of an example of one way to where you will reach both, where the broadcast and the educational are often very intimately involved. It was also surprising when that film was bought for international broadcast. And we had been thinking of it as really very much an American film for an American audience. But sometimes those things can surprise you. So even on the distribution side and on the funding side, you put something out there, and it can reach audiences that are unexpected, and that can often happen.
I remember actually seeing Two Towns Called Jasper pitched at an event called the Hot Docs Documentary Forum, which is, if you're not familiar with it, an event that coincides with the Hot Docs Film Festival. They select a certain number of projects for presentation in front of a very esteemed panel of commissioning editors, with the idea being that you make your pitch, and if somebody gets really excited about it, you may walk away with some funding in hand. They already had some of their funding in place. They had shot pretty much everything that they were looking for completion funds. And the sentiment in the room, first of all, it was one of the most dynamic pitches that I think even to this day that I've seen. Marco Williams got up and actually, instead of sitting at a table and presenting like this, he stood up with the mic and he walked the room and showed his material in a very interactive way that could fit in with his well-prepared, well-scripted delivery, and then he would go to a clip, but it was back and forth. I think the reason that Cynthia expresses some surprise at its international potential, which I did too at the time of seeing the pitch, and this is maybe where the defining your market issue kind of plays into this, This was a very talky film. It basically involved the production teams, one black team and one white team, going into this very segregated town where a terrible lynching had taken place, essentially, and looking at the same subject from the very polarized environment of this incident having happened. And so essentially it was all talking head interviews. Now, for the international market, the talking head interview and the program that is dependent upon that really suffers, because, of course, as soon as you go into a foreign language market, the issue of how do you version that film comes up. And it's not that those films don't have a place in our environment and aren't important and essential in our environment, but let's face it, from the standpoint of being a TV viewer yourself, sitting still and watching an hour or 90 minutes of nothing but talking heads with subtitles or dubbing, and dubbing is now much more the norm overseas than subtitling, can become extremely tedious. The reason that Two Towns Called Jasper, I think, transcended that is because the power of the material and the kinds of moments that they were capturing, people weren't sitting in the usual Arts and Entertainment Network fashion with the lamp on the bookcase behind you and the pot of flowers over here, and then a brass lamp, another brass floor lamp next to them in the wing chair. They were being interviewed in beauty salons and gas stations and restaurants and everywhere. And so you really, at the same time that you were getting yes, it was talking head delivery, but you were getting a feeling for the atmosphere that these people lived in and worked in, and why the town was as polarized as it was. And I think that from an international standpoint, not only was the incident itself seemingly something out of a past that they thought America had gotten beyond, but it was the first time that they'd seen that kind of analysis or that probing approach to such an incident. And I don't know. I'm aware of certain territories, but in the end, it was sold. What were some of the countries it was licensed in?
Germany and Arte and Serbia.
Right.
And I think there's a fascination on the European side, to some extent, about this issue of race in America. In the case of this particular film, given that kind of more traditional approach, in a sense, in that it was a lot of talking heads, was the backstory. How the film was made became as important a vehicle in reaching an audience as the film itself. It almost became a parallel story with the black film crew and the white film crew, who had agreed, they were lifelong friends. And they had agreed when they took on this project that they would go to the town of Jasper and they would shoot with a black film crew and with a white film crew and not speak to each other at all during the actual production. They never revealed to the people that they were filming that they were working together. When they came back to New York to edit, these are lifelong friends, filmmakers who've been working together, gone to school with each other since high school, sat down to edit. Their racial differences came to the fore, and it nearly tore the relationship apart. It's one of the reasons why they went over budget, and the time frame in which they said they were going to complete the film was really, they went over budget and over time. When the film finally did get made, the relationship was on a very rocky road. They had discovered that their interpretation of what people were saying and what slant those words would take, and how an audience would perceive those words, became the audience for each other and for their own work. So the story behind the film got out there and was really used to promote the film. And they wound up being on Oprah. And when you're on Oprah, there you go. It just Another interesting backstory on this particular film from the funding side is at that point when they were running into difficulty from their funders, which was through PBS. PBS really wanted to pull the plug on them and assign them a different editor because they felt it was perhaps getting out of hand. But they held their ground. The two filmmakers held their ground, got the funding, got the finishing funds, went on to finish it the way they wanted to finish it. And in the end, that season, I think it's 3 seasons ago, PBS wound up using Two Towns of Jasper as one of their premier feature films to promote the POV season that season after running into a lot of doubt. And so it's a wonderful story about perseverance on a number of levels. And you know, if you feel that you have a particular point of view and you want to say something in your film and you're very clear about that, there are ways to persevere. So,
you know, one of the things I wondered about that film is whether for educational distribution, did they make another version? Did they cut it down into shorter classroom use elements, or does it get rented intact?
Yes.
I mean, the educational market is both a rental and a sale market, and of course, it's been very much threatened by the video business and how the video business has sort of brought pricing down. I mean, you used to be able to sell a title for what, $450, $500 for an hour, right?
Yeah.
And
well, it's still up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's still the pricing's come down to some extent.
Right.
But I actually we have found that content really is all, and that length. At least in our market, which is not the K-12 market, we focus, when we say educational, it's colleges, universities, libraries, museums. That length really is not that big a factor. Now, I know that when we're talking again, we're supposed to be addressing markets here. And if you're doing something that's really specifically for the K-12 market, that does become an issue. But in our case, I found that we have some very powerful programs that are 90 minutes and feature length that sell as well as hour-long or half-hour. And for us, a half-hour also is very good, different from what Louise has mentioned about her market. We have found that we do pretty well with half-hours, both in broadcast. On one of our recent programs, Cheerleader, it's a first film by a young filmmaker. It was nominated for a Student Academy Award this year, and just aired on HBO in April. So we did and that's a half hour. It was a 28-minute piece. So,
I mean, I think the issue of running time is one that you have to sort of know what the framework is, but obviously films find their length too, and programs find their length. If you're really making something or devising something or developing something to fit a broadcaster's need, in other words, you've gone online and you've researched what Discovery Channel's doing, what the History Channel's doing, and you can see that their general uptake of independent work is tending to be more half hours, or at the moment they've actually put out a request for submissions of 4-part series, 4 times 60-minute series. Well, then what you're trying to do is both take your idea and merge it with the broadcaster's needs. Single films, however, are their own animal, and if this is a subject that you sort of developed and pursued, driven by a need to make the film, you're not necessarily going to squeeze your idea into any broadcaster's idea of length. I would say, though, that from the standpoint of internationally where your opportunities lie, it would be a mistake to make something of feature length and not make a 1-hour version. And the reason is that broadcasters The broadcasters who have the feature-length documentary slots are a limited bunch. There are far more of them internationally that have 1-hour slots available. And the other thing is that if you're making something a feature length, in certain territories it means that the slot that might be available to you is only late at night and therefore has a lesser budget assigned to it. So you may be sacrificing your income potential if you act like Nick Broomfield and say, no, I'm never making a 1-hour version of my film. Go ahead and do that, but a potential distributor may say to you, well, you know what, I mean, that's kind of really limiting what our opportunities are to act on your behalf, and unless you are willing to make an hour, we don't see the point in taking you on. So it's something to keep in mind. When I say that I don't take on half hours, that's only because internationally, there are far fewer opportunities for half hours. Single half hours, there are almost none at all. And in my estimation, it's pushing a boulder uphill for too little return anyway, since programs are paid for by the pound, essentially. And I would rather see an hour, which, again, there are many more slots available for a single 1 hour, pardon me, than there are for a single half hour. Half-hour series are another story.
Is it really an hour, or is this more like 47 or 50 or 55 as a commercial?
Very good question, because in Germany, a public broadcaster's hour is 46 minutes. A commercial hour in this country and in the rest of the world is also roughly that length. I would say it's far better to make something that is 50, 52, 54 minutes, and then have to worry about making a cut down for a German broadcaster than to start out by making it in that shorter length, which will then limit your possibilities with other public broadcasters in other countries.
So some of the others are longer, 50, 55.
Yeah, right. Like a PBS hour. But they have a little more flexibility because if it's slightly short, most territories are willing to put a short film in or to add more promos for their upcoming schedule, that kind of. So.
And you have, I mean, everything really comes out. All of the answers to the questions, I think, come out of the story itself, which is you always come back to the content. And while you may be completely committed to following a particular story and feel that it has to be a particular length, let's say a 90, most of the programs that we see could definitely be shorter. For the most part, things are too long. And the way you find out whether your program is too long is to show it to a lot of people and before you get to the point where you have it locked in stone, which means having test screenings. It means kind of putting your paranoia aside about at whatever stage you're on, about somebody, either if it's in the research stage and you're just kind of fielding an idea and developing a treatment. In our case, because we do exclusively documentary, they're rarely scripted. But you have to put that out there and have some test audience response. See what people are saying about it. I mean, that first line of defense is always your friends and families and your mom and dad, and they're mostly going to tell you, of course, that they love it. But at some point, you have to put it out there for other audiences. And one of those, one great vehicle, and I recommend it for everyone. Actually, I recommend a couple things for everyone. You have to involve yourself in networks. You have to join things. And I think that there are 3 very important organizations, if you haven't heard of them, that you really have to join that will help you in this whole idea of defining your audience. And that is, one of them is AIVF. How many of you have heard of AIVF? Okay, a lot of you haven't. That's the Association of Independent Video and Film. The price of membership gives you, you get a magazine called The Independent. That in and of itself is worth the price of your membership. I have a copy right here of one recent issue. If you read this faithfully every month, it will answer all your questions. Okay, so that's joining that. The second is IFP, Independent Feature Project. How many of you have heard of that? Not enough. All of these organizations have websites. It's all .com or .org. Independent Feature Project, you join it, you can submit a rough cut, you can submit a trailer. It goes through a jury and a review process. If you get selected, you get to screen your program, you get audience feedback. Essential in helping you think about how to form your story, what markets you're going to approach. Then there are also ways of making contact on the funding side. We're not really addressing funding in this. We're really talking about markets. But it's a great way to get to really, and for many filmmakers, IFP is the first time they've had a chance to actually screen on a big screen in either New York or Chicago to an audience. So it's essential. And then the third organization that is extremely helpful is NAMAC, N-A-M-A-C, National Association of Media, Arts, and Culture. So you join those three organizations. It will put you into a network of people. You cannot do this alone. You really cannot do this in isolation. It's one of the reasons what brought you, I'm sure many of you here today. You know that. So if after you leave here today, if you go home, get on the web, you join these organizations, you will no longer be isolated. It will put you into a network of like-minded people. You'll, be able to bring you to the next step.
I mean, I would add to that group. There's a magazine that I think very highly of, which is called Real Screen, R-E-A-L. It's published out of Canada by Brunico Communications. It's not a non-profit; it's a for-profit publication, but it is the only magazine that is devoted exclusively to the non-fiction television world. And I do mean world, not just North America. They report on international film festivals, international conferences, trends in programming from broadcasters everywhere. It's very insightful. They have a website with a searchable database. If you are in the process of developing a project, one of the things that you need to know is what else is out there. And Real Screen's database is one place to start checking who else might be thinking along the same lines. Obviously, if you have a totally personal project, it's not a question, but as soon as you get into certain bigger topics that are kind of in the zeitgeist anyway, you need to know who is doing what and as much as you can about their approach, where they are funding-wise, because even if the world can accommodate more than one project on the same topic, you need to know how to position yourself against the others that are out there. I would also emphasize that another way, in a sense, the IFP screenings help define your ultimate audience. It's also very important when you finish a project to look for exposure opportunities through film festivals. And I say that to producers, whether you're talking only about North America or you're thinking internationally. Your job isn't done when the film is finished. In many respects, your job has only just begun, because now you have to go through the process of getting the film out there. And festivals are an essential part of this. There are festivals that cater to every kind of special interest, audience, end user, as well as all of those that are there for kind of the general delight and pleasure of the public. Obviously, we all know about some of the more prestigious festivals that have, entertainment and media news has now become its own industries, so 5 years ago, the average person didn't know necessarily about the Sundance Film Festival, but now everybody knows about the Sundance Film Festival. Well, there are lots of festivals, and it's important to identify those that will be a good launch pad for your film, because that will help bring it to your ultimate audience. If you get well reviewed or get good buzz going at a festival, whether it's the Society of Anthropology Festival or Margaret Mead Film Festival, or it's the think of some niche. I won't venture there. I might say something really un-PC, but think of niche, and yes, that festival may help you find your audience, your end user, the people who will ultimately pay for the privilege of having your film. In the end, there were a lot of jokes made over the years about there are a lot of people who approach the documentary, the nonfiction film world as a lifestyle. And then there are those that approach it as a business. And then there are those that are trying to forge someplace in between that will both sustain you, both the soul and the body, and not just be purely an undertaking of passion while you're doing your other job, whatever that may be. So festivals, there are so many of them. AIVF publishes an excellent festival guide, which is very useful from the standpoint that it actually has a lot of anecdotal information about the experience of the festival itself. And it's one of the few places that you can find all that info consolidated. And I think you can buy it without being a member, but if you're a member, it's very cheap. It's maybe $15 for this guide to international film festivals. The other, my favorite festival guide is actually produced by the British Council. And I think if you go to britishcouncil.com or .org, they will have a navigation button that goes to their international festival directory. It has more festivals than you even knew existed, and you can cross-reference them by subject matter, by time of year, by submission deadline. Because once you start entering into festivals, you really need to look at an entire year's worth of events, plan your schedule. I know you need to actually hire somebody to do this for you, but plan your schedule, make your choices carefully, because with entry deadlines and things like that, you can't afford to enter all the ones that you would like to. But the right festival guide will help you determine which ones are really going to make sense for you. And if you pick well, you may be flown to places, you may be asked to come and speak with the film. You may find that certain festivals will be extremely helpful in facilitating your contact with the festival goers, whether it's the public or broadcast industry people or people from other parts of the industry, multimedia, the DVD world, the educational market, whatever it may be.
Just another word about, we probably should open up to questions. I just want to say another word about festivals. It's an expense. And when you're looking at your budget, and most budgets, they're going to ask you not only for your research, production, post-production, you have to put a line item in there for marketing and distribution. And that would include festival fees. As a rule of thumb, the more expensive the festival is to enter, the less it will help you. Extremely expensive festivals are often little businesses unto themselves. You want to try to look at a festival's track record, who's been in it, and what it will do for you if you get into the festival. And so usually those festivals that have a nominal kind of admission submission fee, $15 to $50 max, are the better ones. From our point of view as a distributor, we like to get a film very early on, even before it's gotten into any kind of major festivals, because we see that as an expense we are willing to bear if we take on a program. part of our distribution marketing expense is getting it out to festivals for you, because we know the festivals where our films do the best, and we want to kind of brand that title. We want that title to be associated with us, and you will be, of course, recognized as the filmmaker, but it's our way of building that audience for you, for your film. And if we recognize your film, you submit your film to us early on in its life, that's when we prefer to get it. So some distributors will not do that for you. Some distributors will really only look for films that have already gotten the Good Housekeeping seal of approval by having been successful in a lot of festivals. As I said, because of the sort of vagaries of our particular market, that's not the case.
I just wanted to ask Mrs. Kranz, you mentioned end users. Is there any market amongst the network O&Os or affiliates or hour-long programming and associations that one station buys or the O&Os buy, the company, let's say NBC, buys for its O&O stations and distributes to them and then to others?
Well, you're really asking a question that's been kind of plaguing the broadcast industry for a few years now, which is there really any syndication market left for other than game shows and that kind of fare? And the answer is mostly no. Other than on a commercially sponsored basis. For example, there may be an advertiser who looks at a particular topic or film and they say, we would like to associate ourselves with this subject matter and this particular film, and we will clear a path through our relationships with stations to make that possible. And so it becomes a kind of sponsored barter arrangement. But in terms of stations, whether they're affiliates or whether they're an owned part of an O&O group, no. It just doesn't exist anymore.
What about, you mentioned a sponsor. Let's assume you have an idea. Who pitches it to a company? Let's assume you want to do something with food. I don't mean cooking. I mean the impact of food on people. As an example, how do you pitch it to a company like Kraft or General Mills? Who does that?
Well, it's an interesting question because there was a time when there were a few agents out there who took projects on and acted as a kind of corporate development specialist on behalf of projects. And they did it on a commission plus a retainer basis. They pretty much don't exist anymore, and I'm not sure why, because it seems to me that there is a business there. But I think increasingly producers have become much more self-reliant in that respect, and they're using contacts that they've made either because they're doing a certain amount of corporate video work as part of how they keep their shop running, or they've got friends of friends and other contacts that are helping them find their way in. If you don't have that kind of contact, the friend of the VP of media planning for Procter & Gamble or whatever it may be, you can certainly begin to do research through advertising agencies and find out who's handling which accounts. Ad agencies would like that all business goes through them on behalf of a client, so they try very much to kind of keep it within their realm, although they're not always able to, depending on the client. The client sometimes has their own idea of how it should be handled, and they want what would be called underwriting, corporate underwriting, to be, to a certain degree, kept as an in-house activity and not farmed out to the ad agency. But you can do it by researching ad agencies and finding out, who has what account and whether there might be actually an advantage for them in taking your project to their client. Is there something in it for them?
Do you guide them?
No.
Do you do anything like that?
No, because our world is not, that's a very commercial approach to both marketing and funding. And in our case, we really don't have anything to do with that. As a matter of fact, for most of the filmmakers we work with on the funding side, have to be very careful about the relationship between the content of their work and their funders. And if they're trying to, let's say, do a documentary about examining the ills of,
Well, even the pharmaceutical industry
drugs,
comes up
a lot. That's they have to walk a very narrow line between doing an objective documentary and advocacy. Because an advocacy film, if the funder somehow is painted in a very positive light in the film, it's like an infomercial, and that's something we would stay away from. We would with a 10-foot pole. It's something we would not involve ourselves in.
I'm working on a project that has to do with certain events in childhood and how it affects people as adults. And I think it has a very, very broad market. And if you start looking at funding sources, it says, who's your market to find your market? And I'm thinking, well, it can be, social service agencies, PBS. And so I'm thinking, maybe I don't understand how to define the market. It can be shown in lots of different realms. I was wondering if I know without going to the whole project, if you can be that general.
Sure.
It seems like such a much harder thing, and it seems it's supposed to be harder, but
I tell people who come to us with treatments or ideas, let's say just at the idea level, that unless it's formed, the project is developed, this is now in the world that I deal with some kind of broadcast potential, it's virtually unfundable from our point of view. The broadcast component has to be built in. Whether or not it ultimately gets funded by an acquisitions program or licensed or not, you have to be thinking, you have to form it in a way that it would be suitable to reach a broadcast audience. And you have to talk about that in your proposals. And all of those other social service agencies, the website, the outreach, access, if it's serving the needs of a particular community that suffers from a particular disease or syndrome, that's all part of that. And the website and dealing with community and all of that can be built in. But from our point of view on the funding side, the broadcast element has to be there, or it's a tough road to hoe.
So you say the market is PBS audience?
Yeah, there are. PBS, of course. Yeah, but HBO is great. IFC. There's the free speech TV. We could probably find a way, to get how much money the licensing deal that would be made is another story. But I think there's so much opportunity now for independent film to reach that audience. I think it's a great time for you folks to be involved in making programming. It really is, because you might not get rich certainly doing it, but there's an audience out there and there are ways to find it, and more so now than ever before, at least.
I'm interested in the educational market as distinct from the broadcast market. 15 or 20 years ago, the American Film Festival sort of covered the gamut of educational material out there. What's happening now with all of that? Are the distributors like the Encyclopedia Britannica and Time Life and all of those folks, are they still doing this?
Well, we're doing it. I mean, we've been around since '68 doing it, and we have competition. You know, there are other independent distributors
Who shall go unnamed.
Yes, who will go unnamed right at the moment, but they are out there. I'll leave it to you to find out who they are.
So is it being done the same way?
No, I mean, there's
No.
no single educational film festival. I remember those days, too. I used to go to that festival because you would often find interesting
that's
things.
true.
But no, the decision makers from those kinds of companies are attending a lot of other festivals. They have a need in their particular catalog, and they go find a festival that will hopefully turn up some new candidates for them. So they're out trolling the marketplace, you know, looking for stuff to fill in their catalog.
But it's generally handled the same way. Schools and colleges and libraries are purchasing their material from companies like PBR.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, they're still buying. I mean, the biggest challenge for us, I think, as a company, looking back over the years, I've been there since '93, but is really the press of technology. It's really the delivery system, you know. And we started 16 millimeter film in the classroom. And then the biggest hump was in the 80s, transitioning all that stuff to tape. And now we're dealing, I mean, we just this year decided to bring all of that in-house, and we converted all 500 titles to DVD. This was the year in the educational market that was the do-or-die year for distributors who didn't get all their stuff, even their back catalog, onto DVD this year. I think that's what has driven the technology side for distribution. May have driven a lot of them out of business when they face that monumental cost.
Do you market your library strictly by the internet, or does it work in the same way it used to? Send out preview films.
There's a whole range of stuff. We have the web is, you know, the key. My biggest advertising line item in my budget is Google advertising. Then there's print catalogs, which we have done less and less of, but we still do 2 print catalogs a year of new releases. We do a lot of flyers and that kind of thing. We do film festivals. We do academic conferences are very big for us. You know, whether it's the American Psychological Association, the Asian Studies Association, we're very heavily invested in that as a marketing tool.
Thank you.
We got a wrap-up sign. We need more questions. Or how many? Oh no, we only have 5 minutes.
Well, you were.
Okay. If you're developing a project, how common and useful is it in terms of looking for funding to have a distributor on board that early?
The question was, if you're developing a project, how common is it to have a distributor on board at an early stage? I think it depends on the project. It happens more and more now, particularly for distributors or agents who want to form a relationship with a producer or a project that will last over time, and see their early association with it, even if initially it's still very speculative, that by getting involved early, that there's an opportunity there to perhaps bring the project a greater degree of success. So it's more common now.
And sometimes what you need or what will help is not necessarily a signed and sealed contract with a distributor, but just an expression of interest will do. That doesn't bind either you or the distributor or the broadcaster. You know, there are folks at WGBH, if you make contact with them and say, look, what do you think of this? And looking at your background and your proposal, would be willing to write a letter and say, gee, if you get this done, we'd really be interested in the potential of a broadcast. We do that for people too. We say we like this idea. If you get it done in the way that you've laid it out here in this treatment, we very seriously think of offering you a distribution contract, and that can be helpful.
Along the same lines, is that something you can use to raise funds? If you don't have like a written contract, you have discretion?
Oh, absolutely. Anything like that, especially if you're an unknown and you don't have a track record, anybody willing to sign their name to a piece of paper that says they like what you're doing will help, sure.
So if you're without that track record, what do you look for in a project and your background?
I think that's probably a bigger question
Yeah.
than we have time for
Yeah,
because
that-
we've just
yeah.
been
Yeah.
flagged again, but be happy to talk.
Yeah, and we have a table, documentary educational resources. We have a table in the exhibition room. People who are here who would like to email me, I'll give out my email. I have a good spam filter, so it's cclose, CCLOSE @der.org.
Okay.
I'm a risk taker.
Contrary to Cynthia's 500 titles, I work with a very small portfolio, so my rejection rate is really, really high. My email address is lrosen@aol.com.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks a lot.